Okay, here we have Arthur Torrington, and Arthur is a community historian. Just one sec. Who's going to tell us about black and ethnic minority involvement in the British wars and the racism that impacted on this. There you are, Arthur.
Now, I think I'm going to actually stand so I could see most of you here, which is better. Because of time, it's going to be impossible to actually cover the war that lasted 4 years in a few minutes. But just to say to you that the involvement of African and Caribbean people was enormous, in the sense that in the Caribbean, there was recruitment in the Caribbean, but the Caribbean soldiers did not leave the Caribbean until 1915, because Lord Kitchener did not want the Caribbean soldiers to fight. He just didn't want them, because he felt that, you know, to actually have Caribbean soldiers fighting against the Germans, it would let the side down. Indeed, fact. So he and King George had an argument, and of course the king won. The king won, and eventually the Caribbean soldiers began to take, you know, their journeys in October-November 1915. But what happened badly was that some person who couldn't manage the situation sent them to England without winter clothes. Indeed, because when they were going through Canada, many of them got frostbitten and could not actually get to England. Many of them went back to the Caribbean, you know, with amputated legs, all kinds of things, disabilities. Dozens of them went back to the Caribbean. And indeed, you know, that was a disaster, because when you volunteer to fight, you go to fight. You don't actually just get back to your post in that position. But indeed, so those who went back to the Caribbean, I understand that there were homes set up for some of them, but most of them really weren't looked after. Most of them didn't have proper treatment. Now, that was the Caribbean angle in terms of disability. But when it came to the Africans, something like, and according to Hugh Strawn, nearly 2 million Africans took part in the war. 2 million. You wouldn't realize, because when you look at the actual British contribution, this is Britain and this is Scotland, Wales and so on, it's about 4 million altogether. 4 million soldiers and the involvement. But in terms of Africans throughout Africa, you're talking about 2 million. But when you take into consideration that the Germans were also using Africans, and Africans were fighting Africans. German Africans fighting British Africans, German Africans fighting French Africans. And that was the war. That was the horrific war in Africa, in terms of the fight, in terms of the First World War. And in fact, we are told that the casualties overall was between 30% and 35%, including the disabled, including people who were, you know, couldn't make it. And in that part of the world, in terms of how the disabled are treated, many of them really did not actually make it. So if you calculate 30% of over 2 million, that's a lot of people, including about 15% deaths. So you're looking at a lot of people, maybe 300,000 people fighting in Africa. But then, what was even worse was that whether they were on the British side or the German side, none of them won, because they all remained in colonialism. They didn't win. So what did they fight for? So that is the folly of war, sister. That is the folly of war and the brutality of war. Some were fighting for nothing. Just come and fight for us. The thing was, you know, you don't come and fight for us because the Germans would treat you worse. Right? Many a time I read from Strawn that there would be leaflets dropped, you know, in the forests and in the various places, saying, "Give up your arms and come onto the British and fight for us instead of the Germans. But sometimes they did. They did actually go on that side, but then you couldn't win on either side. Because eventually, the war lasted longer in Africa than in Britain and, of course, the Western Front. Because when they were actually negotiating, you know, finishing the war and so on, they were still fighting in East Africa. Until somebody told them, you know, the war has ended. Why are you guys still fighting? And then they stopped. And the interesting thing about it is that the German general felt that he didn't lose the war. And he went back to Germany triumphantly, a hero, we are told. So the whole thing about this war was absolute folly and brutality. The lives being killed and the disabilities for no really good reason, for the Africans at least, and the Caribbean. In terms of the Caribbean, many times we are told that when the war was finished and they were sent back to the Caribbean, they didn't go back home because they were supposed to be rebels and they were sent to Cuba or the various places. Because it was felt that these guys, if they went back to the Caribbean in one piece, they'll cause a revolution. So don't send them back to Jamaica, not Trinidad, send them to Panama, send them anywhere else. But not back home because they were rebels. So really and truly, the Caribbean and Africans in that particular sense did not really win in the war. Although no doubt they were fighting for the British won, but the Caribbeans and Africans did not feel that they actually won. So,
1 minute, please. So
just to sum up, Africa and the Caribbean contributed. We're looking at possibly over 2 million and 1/3 casualties. And that to me was a loss that really and truly those wives who actually had to endure, you know, loneliness, etc., or even poverty in terms of money. In fact, in Africa, we are told that some people never got paid till now. So thank you very much for hearing me. Thank you.
Thanks to what is probably largely quite a hidden history, really. You don't know the impact of those numbers. I've never known, would have known about that contribution, but never those numbers. Thanks very much, Arthur.